Family is a word we often use to describe our schools, but family isn't always easy. Families are messy at best. We are family. That's what's next on this episode of the Educators Among Us podcast.
Welcome to the Educators Among Us podcast, where we share motivational messages and inspiring stories for and about educators. Your host, Scott Barron, is author of the critically acclaimed book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, and provides powerful insights and wisdom for those who heed the call to teach, coach, lead, and serve at all levels of education.
This is Scott Barron, and I'm honored to be your host for the Educators Among Us podcast, a special program for sure, because we get to speak into the lives of educators, those people who work in all roles of education systems and individual small schools out in the country, in the city, and day schools and boarding schools and military schools and adult education and higher ed and preschool. It's amazing, isn't it? How many schools are out there, and it's growing. The number of schools, especially in the United States, is continuing to grow, and really throughout the world as new models of education are emerging, and people are learning new ways to start schools and to re-engineer schools and transform schools. And boy, it's an era of real change for education, way more than happened in COVID, because this time it's permanent. This time that we're on a whole new journey. And so, it's an exciting day, but it's also a time where we're tired, especially in the United States, as we're entering the last few weeks and maybe the last month of the school year. Man, people are tired, they're burned out sometimes, but the best find a way. Right? They sustain their energy, and they find a way to stay focused even though. And that's the reason for this podcast, is to give you a little bit of energy, a little boost for some of you that really are wanting to have someone who can remind you of that calling and the impact of our work. And so thank you. Really, thank you for your service. Thank you for answering the call and being there day in and day out sometimes, and being ready for what it takes. One of the things that a lot of people enjoy is cooking, right? It's a passion for many, and there's even competitive cooking shows that for entertainment, where the chefs are challenged to create a savory dish from unique combinations of ingredients. And sometimes I watch those shows and wonder, how in the world are they going to make something tasty out of that? But they know what to do. They know what to use of what's available to serve up a masterpiece. And it really is incredible to watch their creativity. Have you thought about that when it comes to schools, right? What's a recipe for a school? If you think about the starting ingredients, all of these families and educators from different backgrounds, and bringing them together, right? Their expectations and their execution, their behavior, their values can vary widely sometimes, right? So it's not surprising then that sometimes the experience there has some conflict, has some conflicting expectations and behaviors, etc. Now, what's a word that we often use, a phrase in describing our schools? We are family, right? We are family. And then, you remember the Sister Sledge, right? The song, and it's a fun song. When that comes on the radio, everybody kind of jumps up and kind of sings. And yeah, it's a fun song, and it has some resonation with some of what we talk about in our schools. But families are tricky, right? Families are stable. They're volatile. They're safe. They're risky. They're inseparable. They're divided. And the conflicting experiences goes on and on. People have different versions of what it means to say the term family, right? Our perspective can vary widely. People are pretty forgiving when it comes to other people's families. The only family that ever horrifies you is your own. That's Douglas Copeland, right? Sometimes we have a willingness to accept the failures and the faults of other families, but in our own, sometimes we draw the line, right? Because there has to be somebody who sets high expectations, right? think about it for a moment. If you're, as an educator, if your team, if your school, if it was a TV show, what TV show would you say best defines our organizational culture? Which is the most accurate? Could be All in the Family, maybe Modern Family, or Family Feud, or The Addams Family. Got some weirdness going on in here. This Is Us. That was one that was suggested by one of our school growth members. And what about The Love Boat? Schools are indeed as complex as families, right? And it's an interesting exercise, maybe to do at a faculty meeting sometime, to think about what TV show best describes us, right? And because, it makes sense, because schools are formed through the coalescence of many families with all of their features as well as their faults. And none of that goes away when they're folded into this conglomeration, right? Families have a vital purpose, but they also have some consequences, right? A family is a place, said Charles Swindoll, where principles are hammered and honed on the anvil of everyday living. That's where we test things. It's where we grow. And schools are like that too, right? Mixing families into the emotional ecosystem of a school yields predictable struggles, right? Because why? Because schools are places where learning and growth and failure and creativity and maturity occur. And like we talked about in a previous message, growth is painful. Learning is painful. Schools are places of difficult negotiation rather than offering peaceful coexistence. Schools are places of overcoming challenges, not just compliant adherence. Schools are places, right, of resilience in the fire of testing, right, of testing it, rather than curricular hideouts. And this is not just testing in terms of academics, but we're testing all aspects of growing up and learning truth and wisdom and knowledge, right? Schools are places of advancement, not retreat. We're pressing forward towards what's next, and that has conflicts with it, and we're battling through, and sometimes we have to have the courage to stay in the mix and recognize that it's okay. We can have points of conflict, but we can't lose that love. We can't lose that trust with each other. As 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply. Right? Why? Because love covers over a multitude of sins. Love enables grace. Love enables forgiveness. Love enables a hope, right? And that's a vital part of our work as educators, is love always, right? Schools are difficult by design. If you do the math, it makes sense that you bring in all these complicated sort of backgrounds and expectations and behaviors, et cetera, and it gets multiplied. And so, yeah, the schools are going to be places where we, understanding helps shift our expectations. Hopefully, we learn to understand each other, right? We learn to expect that there's going to be some conflict, but it doesn't have to linger, because we know that conflict avoided isn't conflict healed. We have to be those healers. We have to be able to work through the conflict. Listen, they contain all of the ideal ingredients needed for adversity. Schools are inevitably going to work through adversity and rumbling and strife. That's just part of the journey. Peace and stability, they're just not on the menu of most educational institutions. So perhaps our marketing and enrollment messages should honestly reflect this reality. Yeah, we're a family, but we could be a mess sometimes, right? Because life is messy. Learning is messy. Growing up is messy. Right? Without proper tools and skills, it's really hard to overcome these human tendencies that make leading and managing a family culture so difficult. So, hey, thank you for your service. Thank you for being willing to get messy, to love people through that. And I want to ask you to be that glue. Be that glue that enables a cohesive family this week, my friend, sticking together through the everyday testing of school life. Because love covers those inadequacies. Love covers those fights. Love covers those heartbreaks, right? It heals wounds. It frees our mind and spirit to experience the joy of release, right? So thank you again. Thank you for being in the mix, for being present here as you're finishing up the school year here in the United States and others. I got an email today from one of our listeners that's over in Africa, and they're just starting their school year. They're in a completely different season, and they serve some schools there in Kenya, and it's been really exciting to see their growth and their progress, and that's the joy of this work and what we do through School Growth as well as Educators Fellowship is to be a part of the journey with educators all around the world and trying to maybe lighten the load a little bit and to find some words as well as some inspiration that might help get us through. And so we're just honored to be a part of this with you. Hey, a coaching question to consider as you work through the challenges of this day and this week. Did I do my best to stick like family today? Did I do my best to stick like family today? Love him and lead him, my friend. This is Scott.
Thank you for joining us for the Educators Among Us podcast and for your courageous commitment to this noble calling. We get you and the challenges of this work. To stay connected with this community, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and weekly encouragement at educatorsamongus.com.